Hey guys, welcome back to Home Built, and in this episode we tackle something that is going to be quite challenging, and that is the dry sump oil tank. Alright, yes, those of you who watched the previous episode will have seen that I've finally made my cut out my bonnet and got a lot of that stuff done, and the next thing I'm going to actually get in and tackle is the dry sump oil tank. Now, for those of you who don't actually understand what dry sump is, you might have heard the term thrown around a bit, but don't really grasp what it is. If you look at most regular engines, like what I had on my Datsun, you have a sump on the bottom, which is a big pan that all the oil sort of drains down to and sits in there, and the oil gets sucked up out of there. The issue that a lot of race cars have is that particularly when they put slick tyres on, you're going around an extended corner, all the oil sloshes to one side, and the pickup goes dry. Sucks air, no oil, and it only takes a couple of seconds and your bearings are gone and goodbye engine. So the way that a lot of them get around that is they actually have the oil goes out to a separate external tank, and it's drawn from there. It's usually a tall tank, so that sloshing doesn't really make much difference because the oil is way higher than the base. And that is what the Ferrari and actually what Harry, the old air-cooled 911s, are also dry sump. They have a dry sump external oil tank. Now, I'll take you through now some of the issues I've got with trying to mount a dry sump oil tank on the Alfarrari, because like you might have noticed in the past, we don't have much room. So as you may have seen previously, you see how tight the engine is in the engine bay here, and it doesn't get any better down underneath. Okay, so now we're under here. You can see this is the adapter plate I made up to adapt the Ferrari engine to the Subaru gearbox. And you might have noticed that it's got this big, massive AN fitting on the side of it. And basically what that is on the Ferrari, the dry sump oil tank sat on top of the gearbox and actually ran through the gearbox, out through and into the Ferrari engine. So as part of this adapter plate, we had to make this oil gallery go through into the return for the Ferrari dry sump. So this is where the return oil comes in from. The issue I have down under here is that there is no space. So you can see here we have exhaust has got to come through here somewhere. We have the steering rack. There is nowhere else for this fitting, this large hose to go to get it over to the other side. To get it over to the other side of the car, there's no height here to run this massive size hose. So it's got to be an oil sump tank, dry sump tank on this side of the car. The other issue is we can't run it up. I was originally going to run it up, but there's just no room with this exhaust here. We can't go up. It's just going to be in the way of the exhaust. There's no way to do it. So I've looked around everywhere and I've discovered where I'm going to have to put my dry sump oil tank. Okay, so now you can see we're looking in from the wheel well, and you can see the output of that fitting there. So the only way we can run this line is to run it through behind under here, tuck it around this edge here, and the only place for a dry sump tank is actually inside this front guard here. So you can see I have this large void, which is sort of behind the driver's door. Inside here, I have to make a custom dry sump tank. That's the only spot to fit it, so that's where it's going to go. Okay, so first thing I need to do is to make some space to get this dry sump tank in, and the first thing I need to do is trim out this flange all the way along here, get that out of the way so that I can actually start mocking up and working out how I'm going to get the dry sump tank in. So let's get this out of here and re-weld it up. Everything is going to be reinforced later, don't be concerned. All right, let's start cutting. Alright, so now I've trimmed this out, I've got some more access in here to be able to get in and start mocking up my oil tank. And I've done a bunch of designs on paper, but ultimately it's going to come down to some good old CAD, cardboard aided design. So let's start mocking up my tank. Okay, so a bit of measuring, a bit of CAD, a few tweaks here and there, and I've made myself up a box. And this box is just right to slide in here. So that is using up pretty much all of the space I have, and it's as big as I can make it because I want to get as much volume as possible to get it to do the job. And I think that's going to be as big as it can go. So my next step is to start cutting and bending this, and I'm going to make the whole thing out of aluminium. So let's start transferring this template onto my aluminium and see what we can form up. Okay, another big thank you to my patrons, because when I went and picked up the lathe, I also picked up this very, very old but now working guillotine, which is another fantastic addition to the workshop. It saves so much time cutting things out with the angle grinder. Obviously I can do straight lines, but like it's good. I'll just take you over it now because this is quite an interesting old machine. So excuse the filthy workshop, but I've had to actually mount it on some timber boards, and it's actually got an old electric motor here connected up via some sort of rough belts. I've had to cobble this together because when I bought it, this motor came with it, and this is how the previous owner had used it for many years. But originally this wheel was driven by an overhead shaft in an old factory, and a big leather belt would come down and run this machine. So I believe it might be sort of 1920s sort of vintage. It's anybody knows better, correct me in the comments, but I believe it's quite old. It was actually built in Sydney, but this is now all working again. I had to actually do some modifications. This was broken down here. I had to weld up some brackets and fix things up, but it's now working. It's yeah. So let's start cutting things out and see how it works. This thing is fantastic. Oh, that's so quick. This would have taken me 40 minutes to cut out. I still have to do a little bit of cutting out here on the bandsaw just to cut that bottom section, but the rest of it was so quick, so easy. This thing works fantastically well. I do have to rejig this whole end of my workshop. This is going to end up being my fabrication corner. Yay! Thanks, guys. Thank you very much to the patrons. It has changed things so much. Okay, so now I've got my basic shape folded up. I've been going backwards and forwards trying to make it fit exactly the way I want, because obviously the cardboard is more flexible. This is less so, so I need to make sure that it's going to fit exactly where I want it while keeping it as big as possible. And as you can see, it's in here, but this lip here is just overhanging this edge. The inner guard is not, but the outer guard is. So I'm going to mark and fold and just adjust it so that it fits just right. I am really happy with that as a basic shape. It's I've just taped it together. It's taken a little bit of tweaking to get it to sort of sit just nicely inside the guard. So now I'm going to go through, I'm going to clean it up, and I'm just going to tack this together, and I can continue forward on the rest of it. So I have my basic tank shape here, but this is just currently a big container, and that is not going to do as an oil tank. So basically for a dry sump oil tank, it needs to de-aerate the oil, because when the oil goes through the engine, it gets sort of spun around and flying through everything, it comes out quite aerated, and you want to be able to sort of settle the oil out so it settles out and goes through before it gets pumped back into the car again, hopefully with most of the air bubbles out of it. Generally, most dry sump oil tanks are a cylinder, and the oil comes in on one side and spins around that cylinder, and on the Ferrari it came in one side, but it had like a lip that goes all the way around in the opposite direction to the way the oil comes in. So the oil is going to come in and turn around and then swirl back down in through the gearbox and then back into the engine again. On a lot of the others, I've done lots of research on different types of dry sump oil systems and trying to get an idea of how to build one, because I've never done this before, but I'm using whatever knowledge I can sort of muster to try and come up with something that's going to work reasonably well in this case. Now, unfortunately, I have quite a narrow box, but that's just what I have to deal with. But what I'm going to plan on doing is have a couple of layers of de-aeration going through this, and then the oil will actually come through the de-aeration, but it's also going to be a large level, so the oil can be around the outside of the cylinder as well. You'll understand more as I go further, but for now I need to come up with a cylinder that fits nicely in here. And I couldn't find any pipe that was sort of this size, and also it does taper slightly, and I'm going to use that taper to my advantage. So now it's time to do another cardboard template and see if I can make up the cylinder I'm going to put in the middle of this. All right, that was a lot of work on the roller. First time I've used the roller, and I'm realizing it's quite difficult to get a nice, consistent roll on the roller. It could potentially be that roller. That whole machine is average at everything. It's a 3-in-1 machine that doesn't really do anything very well. But I've managed to get this tube together. Obviously it didn't roll perfectly straight, but that's not a big issue. It's longer than I need anyway. But I've rolled it up. I've used a couple of straps to get it reasonably round. It's not perfect. I'm going to tack it together now and then keep working it. All right, so I've got my tube, I've tacked it together. A couple of tacks are good. I had it way too hot to start with and had some nasty stuff, but this is going to work fine for what I'm after. Basically, what I'm going to be doing is running the oil in, and it's going to spin around here and go through some baffles into the dry sump tank, and then it can be put back into the car again. So this will go inside in the center of here like so. The rest of this tank is for volume. But the next step is we need to work out how we're going to get the oil into it, and that's where this tube comes in with a, it's going to have a dash 12 fitting coming onto the end here, and I'm probably going to make it on a bit of an angle. Actually goes around that way. So I need to work out where I'm going to put this this tube now, and and get it so it funnels the oil exactly where I want it. All right, I know at the moment this is still not making a great deal of sense, but we're getting there. I'm really happy with the shape of this box. I think this is perfect for what I need, and this tube actually goes in and fits in beautifully like that. So the oil is going to come in here, spin around inside this, go through a couple of baffles, and then be sucked out the bottom, going into the back into the engine again. That is the basic principle. So before we go too much further, I think it's time to actually zip up all the sides on this and zip this up. Okay, so the welding on the sides of this came out okay. It's definitely not pretty, but it's solid. It's going to hold. This, I definitely need a lot more practice with the TIG. You can sort of see there were moments that it was quite sort of reasonable, but the overall look is average. But I don't really care what it looks like. You're not going to see it, but it will be nice and solid. There's no, like, you can already see. It's much easier to see with the TIG welder if you've got any air bubbles, because you sort of, because I can't zoom in here, but the liquid sort of balls up and there might be a little hole and you can see the hole just disappear and pop, and you see it all flow nicely. So practice is definitely something I need. This stuff on this is sort of like 2mm thick aluminium, much easier to weld, whereas this stuff is 1.6 or something, and butt welding it was horrible. There's hideous welds there, but they'll grind back okay. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm just going to just do a little bit of tidying up on this, and this part is done, and I might trim the top and bottom off. So using the grinder, unsurprisingly, makes this look much nicer. It's much shinier and prettier now. So that insert is fantastic, and it's a perfect fit for my dry sump tank. But that is all the time I have today, so we'll have to wait till next week to see the rest. But for now, it's time for Fun Facts with Mrs. Jeff.
Hey guys, 1992 saw the Alfa replacement for the 75. The all-new 155 was based on the Type 3 platform, which was shared between Fiat, Alfa and Lancia. The biggest change was the switch to front-wheel drive. The 155 was offered with a range of twin-spark, 4-cylinder petrol engines or turbo diesel engines. Top of the range was the 166 horsepower, 2.5-litre V6 and the Q4, which was a 2-litre turbo all-wheel drive, making 190 horsepower. The all-wheel drive train was taken directly from the Lancia Delta Integrale, while the Q4 was essentially an Integrale with a different body. In 1995, the 155 was basically given a facelift with a wider body and a better range of spoilers. The Silverstone edition, or Formula as it was known in Europe, was Alfa's attempt at homologation for the British Touring Car Championship. It used the Q4 driveline, but it was lighter weight and it had some bolt-on aero mods. By the end of its run in 1997, almost 200,000 units had been built.
All right, that was a You're teasing me.
No, I'm not. I
clapping.
think we've been almost married for 10 years now and I'm starting to imitate you.
I didn't get a crazy amount done. There was lots of planning going into this, my nice crown for the engine here, my dry sump oil tank. There's still a lot more to do, but hopefully next week I should be able to button that up. But I'm quite happy with how it fits in there. That was the hardest part, is actually making it, finding a space to fit it and getting it in there. So it's all going well. I am, I'm very happy with it. So
please like and subscribe if you haven't already, and join us for a day earlier if you want to. If you'd like to see the videos a day earlier.
On Patreon, join us on Patreon. It really helps us out. And as you've seen around the workshop, it's really helping getting things like the lathe and the bandsaw and stuff. Thank you very much, patrons.
Thank you.
So, all right, guys. See you next time.
Anyway, this was shared by Fiat, Lancia, and Alfa. The top of the range was the 166 litre. No, it was not. The top of the range was, and the Q4, which was a, oh, that's not right. The all-wheel with a different body. It was a British attempt, Europe's attempt, Alfa's attempt. From the Delta there. How many times do I have to say the word? This is the hardest word in the world. Homologation. I feel like I've been struggling with this word for 5 years now. Homologation. Woo! Was the British attempt at homologation. What?
It was Alfa's attempt.
But it had a lighter body weight and used bolt-ons.
Yes.
Whatever those are.